opponent of the Populares, the faction of the Populares, and of anyone who breached the constitution. Cato had rigid views of right and wrong, and he had no sense of humor. He was impervious to physical discomfort. Apart from the fact that he was a heavy drinker, like Socrates, he lived austerely. Seneca the Younger claimed that Cato the Younger even surpassed in practice the ideal sage of Stoicism, the Stoic philosophy. He ate as the modest Romans once ate, frugally. He dressed in black in contrast to the dandies who dressed in purple. He did not use basins or horses to transport himself, as he always went on foot to all the nearby places. He thus identified himself with the ancient Roman fortitude and incorruptibility. By 52, Rome seemed to be on the verge of falling into complete anarchy because of the struggles between the political leaders Claudius, Milus, Julius Caesar, and Pompey the Great. Cato considered that the latter was the only one capable of saving Rome from anarchy. Without falling into an unconditional support to Pompey's dictatorship, Cato proposed a legal solution where Pompey would have enough power to defeat the other political leaders. So the most unshakable traditionalist in the Senate squared the traditional Roman virtues with the global role that Rome now had as an empire. Cato effectively and actively opposed the reformers of the constitution and the change of the republican regime in Rome. The political activity without concessions shows his freedom of maneuver in contrast to many other members of his faction, the Optimates, who showed great fear and concessions towards Julius Caesar and his supporters. Caesar's civil war began in 49, among many other reasons, due to the deep personal enmity that many senators had between each other. At the height of the civil war, in 48, Cato, despite supporting Caesar's opponent, continued his declarations that the death of every Roman citizen must be lamented, regardless of the political side. So in the last years of the civil war, Caesar marches to capture the port of Utica, and his surviving rivals from the Battle of Pharsalus, where and Utica was the base of operations of the Optimates and the base of operations of Cato. As I quote, "It will be a great propaganda coup if he, Caesar, could extend his clemency to this Cato, obdurate upholder of republican values." Cato understood this too and was determined to prevent him. End of quote. Cato refused to parley with Julius Caesar because, in his words, the general is acting against the law when he pardons people over whom he has no authority. The Republican politician commits suicide in 46 and will inspire Brutus, another Roman fond of philosophy, to lead the conspiracy that effectively assassinated Caesar in 44 before Christ. Now, some 10 points of comparison between the two political figures and philosophical figures. Both participated actively in the civil wars of their respective nations. Ramírez in favor of a progressive party and Cato in favor of an ideology or political inclination that could be called maybe anachronically conservative. In such participation, they publicly lamented all deaths caused by civil wars, and they both insisted that war should be as short as possible and the less lethal possible. In Caesarean terms, during the civil wars, both practiced the suffering characteristic of the virtue of strength. Both suffered for the deaths in the civil wars. They never betrayed or changed their political adherences or ideologies, not even during the dangerous times or urgent times of civilian of civil wars. In Ciceronian terms, both practiced the domain characteristic of the virtue of temperance. They never committed unjust or immoral acts against any political, military enemy or friend. In Ciceronian terms, both practiced the habit characteristic of the virtue of justice. They conducted what we would call today as performance of virtue to attract the attention of public opinion in favor of their respective political, military factions and ideals. For example, Ramirez gave poverty performances, and Cato gave a continuous performance by dressing in black or growing hair and beard as a sign of mourning for the death of republicanism in Rome. Here, a picture of Cato from the HBO series Rome that showed him in black. They both became the top representatives in their respective cultures of total freedom of thought and action, even during times of war. They were also paradigms of internal freedom, since nobody was able to coerce or force them. Both practiced what the Stoics called the virtue of wisdom, and in modern terms, they also practiced non-violent resistance. On a personal level, they never agreed to collaborate or accept forgiveness from political leaders they consider immoral or unjust. For example, Antonio López de Santa Anna, here in the picture, Ignacio Comonfort or Maximilian of Habsburg, in the case of Ramirez, or Catiline or Julius Caesar, in the case of Cato of Utica. But because of their non-military civilian character, they never led a group of soldiers during civil wars. However, they did support some military leaders of their factions in some important battles. Ramirez supported General Gaspar Sanchez in the Battle of Mazatlan in 1864, and Cato supported Pompey during the maneuvers prior to the Battle of Pharsalus, and supported Publius Varus in the Battle of Utica. In this case, both showed the science of military prudence. During the civil wars and also in times of peace, they strongly opposed personalist factions or parties, considering them unsuitable for their respective republics. That is to say that they always defended unconditionally a republicanism that must have political counterweights. Ergo, they became historical milestone of the defense of republicanism. And they fought against what today we call populism, coming from the left or the right, especially in times of war. They always obeyed the laws and the legality in the respective states, even during the pressing and difficult moments of the civil wars. For example, in 1865, Ramirez opposed the President Juarez, as this government was strictus sensu, no longer constitutional, and was only supported by the military. In the case of Cato, immediately after the Battle of Pharsalus, he supported Cicero as the warlord of his faction, even over the more capable Pompey, and just because that was the legal procedure. Both became milestones of the defense of legality. They also refused to accept, for reasons of legality, any political order from the two most outstanding politicians of the respective times and countries. Ramirez refused to abide some orders made by Benito Juarez, even when the civil wars was still on progress and Juarez was the leader of his faction. Cato refused to abide any order or mandate made by Caesar, the leader of his political enemies. Again, both practiced non-violent resistance. And finally, they were pushed to death by the civil war, and they faced such death with courage and contempt. Ramirez escaped from such destiny in 1867, the last years of the Mexican Civil War, by a very small margin. Cato accessed such fatal destiny by his own hand in 46 before Christ. Therefore, both are paradigms of the habit of strength, as Cicero describes the virtue of fortitude. So the two politicians reveal us how to carry out an always honorable, virtuous military struggle in favor of a particular political ideology, conservative or progressive, during a civil war. Both are symbols or historical symbols and proofs of a real virtuous moral participation and behavior during a civil war. They are the most comparable thinkers because both privilege the practical moral activity over theoretical work. Thus, we have seen that Ramírez and Cato practiced the virtues as they were described by Cicero. These virtues were born and materialized in Ramírez and Cato, I consider, coming from their patriotism and their unconditional adherence to particular philosophies, liberalism, rationalism, skepticism, or stoicism. The patriotism and the adherence to a particular philosophy are factors that I want to believe are not so difficult to replicate today. It is possible to fight virtuously in favor of a particular political regime during a civil war. That is, to fight a war without ever falling into vices or immoralities, at least in the personal level. I believe that it is possible to moralize, at least partially, by teaching the history of the practical virtuous deeds of outstanding people, and albeit idealistically, the history of moral deeds done in times of war is useful because effectively the study of history serves the moral improvement of any individual who analyze this history. Finding instances of edifying actions in the past, history moralizes. History, according to the German thinker from the 19th century, Johann Gustav Droysen, I quote, does not rectify humanity in a deterministic way. Rectification is only a possibility. End of quote. In truth, I consider, like Droysen, that the study of history constitutes a possible tool in combination with other tools to achieve the highest political purposes, as its subject of analysis is a meta-individual force capable of exerting an ineluctable and irreplaceable impact in human beings. And this cultural impact evidently includes